Hey guys, so in this lecture we are going to see how we can use HTML to update the styling on elements or probably change the CSS. Now let's try to go and see how we can do that. Let's create a small example of a hello world. So let's do this. Let's say I already have this here. So let's create a p tag ID. Let's say hello. Say hello world. Yay. Okay, now I have the hello world. Let's try to update the styling for this using JavaScript. The way we do it is we again do the same thing. We get the element, which is document dot get element by ID. So everything works only when you try to fetch something. So first you need to get hold of the tag or the element that you're looking for and then perform operation. So that's the very basic step. So let's say get element by ID and let's call this as hello. We have methods and properties. So one of the property of this element would be style. So we know that this property has a style. Now even style can be many things. Let's say width, height, size, font, if it's a paragraph or something. So there can be many things including color. So let's say we take color. So what we do is next property is color. So this one has a property and this one has a child property called color. Now let's update this color to something that we like. So it was black. I don't like it as much. Let's change it to blue. And whoa, the answer is blue. Simple, isn't it? You can change color, font size. Let's say after this we do a change in size. So let's say size equals 20 pixels. Oh, it's font size. Font size equals 20 pixel. So you can do many things. You can change the font style, font width, etc, etc, etc. You can add a padding or a margin. Let's say I had a margin of, let's say 50 pixels. So you can see that it moved. So there are many things that you can update using CSS. Okay, so now the other thing is the way you can use styling is what usually happens is you use it along with an event. So let's say I directly converted the color and the styling or the size to this. Let's just do font size. So we say it's increased, but we want to do this when an event has occurred. Let's say I roll my mouse in. So what I do is, so here I give in on mouse over equals my function. Okay. Now I give my function. Let's do a function. My function. And then let's move this inside the function. So now what we're trying to do is we are trying to update this only when I roll over my mouse into it, which is I'm using an event. You see that? And then on mouse out, I need to make sure I revert it back. So let's say on mouse out function, and let's call this when there is on mouse out equals this function. Okay, let's move this to black and let's make this 14 pixels. Let's try to run this and see what happens. Okay, now I go in. It grows up and it's blue color. Let's move out, in, out, in, out. You see that? So you can use events like mouse over, mouse out, and plenty of others to play along and change the styling in CSS, which also means you can create awesome animations. Yes, because animations are nothing but change in the position or change in the behavior of an element over a period of time. They always say the movies can be made with frames, which was like 60 frames per second kind of a thing. So it gives you an illusion that there is an animation or a movie happening. Similarly, you can do the same thing in HTML and CSS. Let's quickly try an example. So let me create a new one, which is, let's say DOM animation. This will cover animations. Let's remove this. Okay, so my template is ready. Now let me start coding for things. Let me first quickly create a block which is in the body and call it as a container. So let's just go and say div id equals container. Let's close the div. Let's create another div and let's call it as an animate, which is a small object that will be inside the div. Actually, if it's going to be inside, let's actually make it inside. Like here. Okay. So you see that? So we have a container and it has an animate object. Let's try to give them some parameters so we can actually see them on the screen. Let's add some styling to it. So the way we can give a styling in HTML itself is you can just go and create a style tag. Once you create the style tag, you can put in your CSS out here, so we can address the container, and then we can have the styling for the container. Let's say I want to make it a width of 300 pixels, height of 300 pixels, color, which is the background color. Let's say background equals, oh, why am I doing with the semicolon? It should be a colon. Okay, background is, let's say we will give it a yellow color. It comes up. Okay, let's also give it a position of relative so that it's there and any other elements cannot be impacted. Let's create another CSS style sheet for the animate object. Animate. Let's create a small block of, let's say, width. Let's copy this so it's easier and change the styling. Let's say we call this as a 50 by 50, color is red. It comes back, and let's make the position as absolute, because then we can change the position of this block inside this bigger box so that you can see it traveling. Okay, now let's click a button, or rather create a button here. So let's create a button up here and let's call it button on click equals move on. Yeah, weird name, but let's try it. Move on. Let's give that button and then let's close this button. And let's give some spacing so that they can be separate elements. Okay, so now you can see this is ready. Now what we need to do on move on, we need to call a function. Let's try to write that function, which is move on. Let's go to our script section. Let's create a function, move on. Let's go and get started. Now before even moving on, you know that we have to get hold of this particular element. Now how do we get that? Well, it's very simple. Let's get the element. Let's say small box is equals to document dot get element by id, and the id is animate. So that's your small box. So now we have the element. Now what we need to do on the element? Well, we need to update the initial and the final position. So let's say initial position is equals to 0, which means it starts from 0, and let's create an interval. The way we do it is, in JavaScript you can create intervals. So let's say you create an interval, a function that can happen after every 10 seconds or 5 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds, and so on and so forth. So let's try to create. Let me just write it and I'll explain you what that is. So my interval is equals to set interval. Let's call this as a frame, 5, which means every 5 milliseconds we are going to update the frame. Frame is nothing but another function. So let's call a frame function. Okay. So what we do in this is we try to do a position plus plus, which means increment the position, which was initially 0. Then after every 5 milliseconds, it will become +1, +1, +1, +1. Now this position variable will become +1. However, the position variable needs to be updated in the styling of this. So we get the element which is small box dot. Remember we had the style. Let's get the style. Now there was a position as well, which is top is equals to position. Let's do the same thing. When my top, which is here, it moves in this direction. Now let's move ahead and get our bottom also, which means our left position, which is from left. Let's start updating that as well. So you can see it moving in a diagonal line. Okay, but before doing that, let's try to make sure that we add pixels to it, because that's just a number. So let's also add plus pixels to see the effect of it. Let's run, let's click, and boo. Oh, but where's the block? Oh, it's keep going, gone. So in that case, what we need to do is we need to make sure that if it reaches as the end of the block, which is this box, we need to stop doing it. And how do we do that? Well, the size of the box is 300 by 300. And if you're moving a box of 50 by 50 down here, so the moment it reaches here, it will be at 250. So let's try to write a condition here. Let's say if position is equals to 250, and then you take an action of stopping that. So how do you do that is you do a clear interval, which means stop the interval from this ticking every 5 milliseconds, stop it. Now clear interval, and then you pass the ID, which was my interval in this scenario. And once you stop that interval, it is not incrementing, this will not go again. The frame function will not be called. Let's try to run this and see what happens. Move on, boom, stop. Now if you want to increase the speed of it or decrease the speed of it, you can change it here, run it, and you can see it got slower. If you want to make it slower again, let's reduce the speed by adding the number or making the number bigger, because the frame will execute a little slower. Now if you want to make it very fast, you can just do a 2. So play along, have fun. You already designed a first animation using JavaScript and CSS. I'll see you in the next class.